I think a lot of people would be quick to say an exclusive car is overpriced just because they don't want to pay that much money for the car. And they usually hold this kind of sentiment when they had no clue what the values were like, and then when they see that it's not as cheap as an objectively worse version of the car, they're just salty because now they find out that the car is unobtainable. But sometimes they might just be right. There are quite a few cars out there that when you consider what they are, what they represent, and what their cheaper variants offer, they're absolutely overpriced.
I'm TJ Hunt and you're watching Instagram.
Starting off with the car that inspired this video, the Alfa Romeo GTA and GTA M. I'm not sure why, but for some reason I've been seeing a bunch of the same clips from the same Shmee video from like 5 years ago, and all of a sudden a bunch of people in the comments claim to be longtime Alfa fanboys and that they've always wanted this car and that it's better than the M3 CS, better than the M4 CSL, that it's the best looking car in its class, so much cooler than an M3, not for damn near $250,000. This car costed more than the base MSRP of a 911 GT3. All right, that was a bit harsh. Actually, no, it wasn't, but price aside, it's actually a pretty cool car. Quick history lesson. The GTA and GTA M were actually made to pay homage to the GTA and GTA M of the late 60s and early 70s, which actually use inline fours and were absolutely gorgeous looking cars. If anyone's in the Carolinas and owns one of these or knows someone who owns one of these and wants to do a photo shoot, please reach out to me on Instagram. And I promise you I'm nice as hell with the camera. Check my portfolio in the description. If you're wondering what GTA stands for, it stands for Gran Turismo Allegrita. If you're wondering what GTA stands for, it stands for Gran Turismo Allegrita, which I believe roughly translates to Light Grand Tour, which makes sense because if you've ever seen a GTA or the heavier GTV, which we got in America, they're actually really tiny compared to the modern ones. Like, think BMW 2002 but slightly smaller, and the GTA was even lighter due to a more stripped interior and the use of alloys for the body. The GTA M stands for Gran Turismo Allegrita M, like literally nobody knows what M stands for. The company never confirmed anything, but I'm gonna assume it stands for Modificata because that's normally what Italian car makers say when they mean something's been modified to look like a race car or drive like a race car or just like actually is a race car. Although I also found this on Wikipedia when researching this video, albeit with no actual credible sources, that it could have also stood for Maggiorato. Hold up.
Maggiorato.
I was pretty close. And that means something like increase, which makes sense because the article said it meant something like increased bore, which adds up because it did have the biggest motor out of all the GTA and GTV models. But these days, it absolutely has to be Modificata because it uses the same engine as the Giulia QV. While these cars don't directly precede the Giulia, they were succeeded by the worst looking Alfetta, which was then succeeded by a newer, weirder, more obscure GTV, which was succeeded by the slightly better looking but equally as weird Brera. I feel like the average American mind struggles to comprehend 80s, 90s, and 2000s Alfa aesthetics because really they weren't designed for this market, even though they did make their return to the US market with the Brera. Anyways, the Brera was built on the GM Fiat Premium platform, which was also utilized by the Alfa 159, and that platform and that specific vehicle were then succeeded by the Giulia and its respective Giorgio platform. And that exact car, with not too many updates, has been on sale for 10 years. For reference, the Giulia has now seen 3 generations of M5, and this includes the GTA and GTA M, by the way. Ultimately, the modern Alfa fanboy that all of a sudden exists equates these cars to the M3 CS and the M4 CSL. Actually, a more accurate comparison would be the F80 M3 CS and F82 M4 GTS, because in all honesty, these cars are of that time. And if people were grilling the M4 GTS for being significantly more expensive for just being a slightly stripped M4 with some bolt-ons, a half cage, and suspension mods, we're about to keep that same energy with the GTA M because that's essentially what it was to the Giulia Quadrifoglio, except it was even more expensive. I just think it's kind of crazy because this car did not have the kind of hype that it does now 5 years ago. Oh yeah, that's because Alfa fans probably went and watched the Shmee video, then said, oh man, I think that would be really cool to have a more extreme version of the Giulia Quadrifoglio. Then they went and saw the price and said, oh wait, I absolutely cannot afford a 911 Turbo S, and if I could afford a 911 Turbo S, I would just buy a 911 Turbo S. Y'all, the Alfa GTA M costed the US equivalent of $225,000, and the GTA wasn't much cheaper at $219,000. You can tune a Quadrifoglio for less money, do a half cage for less money, get rid of your sound deadening for damn near free, do a rear seat delete for damn near free, which means that the biggest appeal to these Alfa fanboys, and honestly this is what it sounds like in the comments, is the looks, the aero, and that can even be done for cheaper. Granted, these cars are produced in smaller numbers, only having 500 in existence, but there's no way that there are more than 500 people on this planet willing to pay more than twice as much for a modified Giulia QV because of some perceived exclusivity exclusivity when they could literally have a 911 GT3. Like, this was for sure made for people who have like a grandpa who had an Alpha GTA or a GTA M, and now they want to have the new one to match. It's the only way I can imagine this price making sense. At the time that these came out, you could have probably found a 458 listed for less money. Now, I'm not saying it would have been the most clean, most pristine 458, but I'm just saying, like, there are options out there at that price point that are way cooler than a FBO Giulia for $225,000. Are you taking a Giulia or a very lightly used Aston Martin Vantage? A Giulia or a really high spec M8? A Giulia or a used McLaren Artura? I'm just saying, to justify the price, they'd honestly have to make a two-door Giulia with all the same mods that the GTA and GTA M have. Now, that's something you can't get with the regular Giulia Quadrifoglio. Wait, what? I remember one time in middle school I got caught for specking a Maserati Gran Turismo on my school issue Chromebook in class, because the teachers had this software that could show whatever was going on our screens, and they could control the computers and take screenshots and stuff. So yeah, she got me. Honestly, I gotta give it to her, but she was tripping because I had an A in her class. And this is the same teacher that wrote me up for playing Grand Theft Auto 5 on a Google Chromebook on September 13th. I mean, I knew when she caught me I was gonna be in trouble, but I was definitely shocked to see that she wrote me up. Almost like how shocked I was when that Maserati Gran Turismo I spec'd out turned out to cost north of $200,000. Since the day I spec'd that Maserati, I took that memory with me until the day that I finally got to drive a Gran Turismo. To this day, it's still one of the best sounding cars I've ever driven. Last video I spoke on how there are about 20 street legal engines that sound good straight pipe. This is definitely one of those. Also, for the record, I've pretty much driven every vehicle that I'm talking about in this video from here on forward. The only ones I haven't driven in this video are the GTA and the GTA M, and that's just because they're not available in America, nor can I afford it. Wait, but now that I think about it, I actually haven't ever driven the regular Giulia Quadrifoglio, but that's gonna actually change soon. I'm gonna be driving it for the channel, so yeah, let me know if y'all want to see some car reviews. Anyways, whoever designed the exterior of the Maserati Gran Turismo, I owe you a firm handshake if I ever meet you. The Gran Turismo to this day is one of the best looking front engine cars of all time in every iteration. It sounds amazing, it looks amazing, just not $200,000 amazing. And we haven't even touched on the interior yet. That's a whole nother can of worms. We also didn't touch on the driving experience, which was absolutely incredible. It just wasn't quite $200,000 incredible. When it first came out, the hype around it, like every other Maserati, was that it used a Ferrari engine, which technically it is a Ferrari engine block amongst other components from the Ferrari. But the reason it sounded so different from a Ferrari was because they swapped the flat plane crank for a cross plane crank. Otherwise, it might have sounded like a 430, which wouldn't have been a bad thing, but Ferrari would not let that fly, and it wouldn't have fit the character of this car anyway. Back then, it was making less horsepower than an E92 M3 on the dyno, and those cars were already making less horsepower than advertised. But this was an even more gross overstatement, especially when you're trying to sell a car with a Ferrari engine for $200,000. But it worked. Then everyone who bought one proceeded to absolutely lose their ass, because there was no reason in hell that this car should have, even after options, costed anywhere near what a Ferrari 430 and later a 458 did. And it kind of drove like a bigger, slightly more luxurious yet more sluggish E92 M3. The transmission and the general characteristics of the car just made it feel a little bit less athletic for sure. But good God, that thing looks and sounds good. But since it didn't perform and felt entirely too similar to a Dodge, because, oh yeah, it shared a lot of the buttons and switches, as well as the entire infotainment system with the rest of the Stellantis group, I'd say it was quite deserving of the depreciation you see on the secondhand market. And before y'all jump in the comments talking about, oh, it was different before Stellantis got their hands on it, yeah, it was worse. The Stellantis interior is peak Gran Turismo interior. Remember how Mercedes used to have the phone dial thing that by the time we all had Bluetooth became incredibly redundant? Yeah, Maserati left that in until the 2017 model year. I don't know what it is with Italian brands just not wanting to update anything. Like, genuinely, my closest comparison at the time of driving this was the BMW M4, and I feel like it should have debuted with more like 911 Carrera prices. It would have been a front engine, better sounding, more comfortable, and honestly better looking competitor to the 911. If they priced it and marketed it like how they did the new Mercedes SL to compete against the 911, it would have made more sense to a lot more buyers. For so long, Maserati was trying to pose itself as a step above Porsche in the same way Porsche poses itself as a step above Mercedes and BMW. But that only works if it's true. Maserati was insanely delusional. If anything, I'd say they're a step below BMW and Mercedes these days. But the name sounds cooler, the cars look better, and they use a Maserati designed engine that's built by Ferrari, and that's about to end soon as well. But if I have to give them credit, they really do look and sound better than the competition. And I know I made a video about cars with pretty privilege a while ago. I need to make a part 2 entirely for Maserati. They still sell the Gran Turismo, by the way, and it actually has a really good looking updated interior minus to touchscreen AC controls. The pricing is still insane, and of course history repeats itself in the secondhand market. There is nothing new under the sun, and as you can see, values are correcting themselves to where they should have started in the first place. The M4 GTS is actually an amazing car and my favorite one to drive on this list. It's honestly the closest feeling you can get to a 911 GT3 for less than $100,000 from 2015 or newer. This was for sure the most raw BMW of the past 10 years, and it was such a blast to drive. It was actually the first F8X car I've ever driven, and since then I've driven a few other F8X M3s and M4s with various mods and tunes, and the argument against the GTS is that you can make a regular M4 feel like a GTS with a tune, which I can tell you after driving an F80 with a very aggressive tune is absolutely false. The GTS is just still that one. It's tactile, it's actually stronger than a 911 GT3 in the bottom end of the rev range, and however hardcore you think your stock F82 M4 might be, this is more hardcore, and no amount of horsepower could change that. What could change that though are the same mods I was talking about with the Alpha GTA-M. See, the problem with the GTS is that its starting price was $138,000. I drove a used 991.2 GTS that was listed at $138,000, and it was honestly a similar driving experience, but it was that Porsche step above that I was talking about. Similar horsepower coming from a twin-turbo 6-cylinder, peak torque that doesn't come quite as soon, which actually made for a more usable power band. The optional manual was better than any manual transmission I've ever driven in any BMW, and this is consistent across all Porsches. All while the M4 GTS at one point was listing at nearly $150,000 on multiple occasions. If I remember correctly, you could fully option an M6 competition for less than an M4 GTS was worth at one point. Again, it was just one of those cars where it was just so high in price from factory that there was just a lot of cars in that price range that made a lot more sense to a lot more buyers. Like the Alpha, it was limited to slightly more examples at 700, but again, this was just perceived exclusivity. I keep saying perceived exclusivity because when something's actually exclusive, it's also hard to produce otherwise. A Bugatti W16 is hard to produce without everything that led to the creation of that. V12 swapping a 458 will not give you the same experience as a LaFerrari, although it would be sick though. GT350 bumpers, a suspension, a rear seat delete, and a Tremec will not make a 5.0 feel like a GT350R. Hell, an E92 M3 GTS, the M4 GTS's predecessor, held its value significantly better. And that's because alongside being stripped out and hardcore, it had a 4.4 liter stroker motor, which is much harder to reproduce than an aggressive tune and water injection for the same motor that came in the regular M4. So now no matter what kind of tune, no matter what kind of force induction you add to that car, tune for tune, boost for boost, that stroker motor will always be capable of more power. If you want a stroker motor in that car otherwise, there was a Dynan car you could buy from the dealership with a 4.6 liter stroker, and it was something like $140,000 still. If you want to put a stroker motor in your E92 M3, you can still buy a stroker kit from Carbon, Steve Dynan's new company, and at minimum that's going to run you like 20 grand, but more realistically, if you want that 4.6 liter stroker, it's going to run you like 30. Say you want to recreate an E92 M3 GTS. Let's say you buy a really clean donor E92 for like $65,000. And obviously I'm well aware you can get an E92 off auction for like 15. You can find them on Facebook Marketplace for like 25. You can get really nice examples for 35, 40. But if you want like a really nice example that's going to be as nice as a GTS, you're probably going to be spending like 65. Then when you drop another probably 30K on the interior modifications as well as the suspension on the M3 GTS, and have fun sourcing that stuff or reproducing it to the same level of quality, by the way. And the reason I say 30K is because those parts are going to be extremely hard to find. They're not going to be cheap when you find them. I mean, look at the new M4 carbon buckets, and even trying to get that interior to reproduce to the same level of quality as the original is still not going to be cheap. Then add another 30K for the stroker kit, plus who knows how much for the work. And that's assuming the motor your car came with has everything functioning properly already, because you're going to want to make sure everything else is going good before you actually do the stroker kit. Then probably another few grand on custom tuning for the new motor, however many thousands it'll cost to strip the car down to the frame, prep, and repaint the car fire orange. Another few grand for the wing, another couple hundred for the GTS transmission tune, and another few grand for goodies under the hood. And you've almost spent as much as an E92 M3 GTS on trying to reproduce it and make a clone. So that, combined with the fact that the production numbers are actually lower than that of the M4 GTS minus the Alpha GTA and GTA-M, are why this car is still almost worth as much as it was brand new. The only things that make the M4 GTS different from a competition model are the door cards, the rear seat delete, the half cage, which is a very common mod for track ready M4s, water injection, which is more or less a meth injection kit that's tuned for cooling when the motor gets hot rather than a constant flow for power, and finally the suspension, which can probably all be had for similar cost to what it would take to buy an M4 GTS at current values. Difference being the M4 GTS's current values are about a little bit more than half of what they were when they were brand new. There's just less that's different about the interior, less that's different about the motor, and prices have reflected that. You can find a good GTS for anywhere from $70,000 to $80,000. $100,000 these days. The one I drove a few years ago during COVID was in the high 90s, and even still, that was a 40K drop from MSRP over the course of 5 years. That's something you hardly ever hear about from cars with triple-digit production numbers. While again, you still find E92 GTS is still transacting pretty close to MSRP, and the MSRP was more than twice a regular M3. The M4 GTS was a fun drive, but I doubt it's nearly as special as an E92 M3 GTS. Let's talk about performance trucks in general, because if you mean to tell me that since they put a Hellcat motor in a Ram truck, that it's worth anywhere close to a used McLaren Artura or a Maserati MC20, you are out your goddamn mind. I'm telling y'all, the GMs and the inventory guys at these American car franchise dealerships, they all wake up, they come into the office, and they smoke a bunch of crap before they set the prices on these TRXs and Raptor Rs. The crazy part about these trucks though, and I guess this is a good thing, is that they don't actually fall below MSRP until you start putting a stupid amount of miles on them. A stupid amount of miles. And honestly, the Raptor R market has seemed to calm down, but I think they're doing sort of a last call thing on the TRXs like how they did with the Chargers and the Challengers. And FCA dealers, I swear to God, they're just trying to test the stupidity of the upper middle class. Because day in and day out, they just fleece the out of suburban dads who have absolutely no business driving a big ass truck to the office like they're going to a job site. And I'm telling you, that's exactly who buys these trucks. It's yo, are we serious? Because I'm telling y'all, that's exactly who buys these trucks. If you're not from the States, you're probably thinking it's these dudes that love going off-road, or they might go to work and they need a truck, so they get the truck. No, they're suburban dads who do absolutely nothing with them. They would have been better off with, yo, what are these sounds? And these prices are absolutely fucking ridiculous. Are you serious? 170K almost for a TRX? And it's likely gonna be sold to a dude that doesn't need it. And I know some of y'all are probably watching this like, well, I go off-road in my truck and I use it to haul stuff for work, so I need a truck like this. See, you got soft hands, brother, you got soft hands. 85 hours a motherfucking day. I'm on my job. For breakfast, I eat a pack of Marlboro Reds with a black coffee. For lunch, I eat a pack of Marlboro Reds and a Coke and a scratch off. You ain't never worked a day in your goddamn life. Welcome to the suburbs. It's about 10 minutes away from the countryside where all the dads live that actually need the trucks, where the dads with office jobs like to measure their size by how nice their truck is. Cause I'm telling y'all, nobody buys these trucks more than upper middle class suburban dads who have absolutely no need for these trucks. Like, they might tow the boat every once in a while. I swear, every day I see a new Hennessy Velociraptor or a fucking Hennessy Mammoth or whatever the fuck they call the TRX, or a Shelby Raptor. Always clean, never seen a day at the job site, never seen a day off-road, only ever seen on the tarmac. You can't scratch the paint on a sweet truck like that. That should be illegal. And honestly, I still feel like the same modifications can be done on these trucks for way less money as well. And have y'all seen the single cab TRX and Raptor builds? Way cooler than a TRX for $170,000. And the crazy part is, there was a time when these performance trucks were reasonably priced. Like a 2014 F-150 King Ranch was maybe $44,000 and some change, and a Raptor wasn't much more. And it wasn't even the most expensive model. The Limited was $50K, and that was the very top of the line half-ton truck from Ford at the time. And even adjusted for inflation today, that's still less than $70,000. And back then, dealers weren't absolutely screwing you with ADMs either. Trucks in general have gotten extremely expensive these days, but luxury and performance trucks are just absolutely unreasonable.